Today on Online with Terry Jeffrey, we talk with author, commentator, radio host, and former Cabinet Secretary Bill Bennett. The topic, his latest bestseller, America, the Last Best Hope. Bill Bennett was born in Brooklyn. He graduated from Williams College with a degree in English and philosophy. He then earned a doctorate from Texas in philosophy and a law degree from Harvard. Bennett served in President Reagan's first administration as chairman of the National Endowment for Humanities and in Reagan's second term as Secretary of Education. He is also a drug czar to President Herbert Walker Bush. He is a Washington Fellow of the Claremont Institute and a contributor to CNN. He has written and edited 16 books, including the Book of Virtues and the Children's Book of Virtues, are among the best-selling volumes of recent times. Bill, it's good to see you.
It's an introduction, not an epitaph. You make me feel like I'm dead. Gosh,
no, yeah,
it makes me tired to hear all that.
A lot more to do, Bill.
Yes, plenty to do.
We're coming up on what I think is the 232nd birthday of the United States of America. And on the first birthday in Philadelphia, founding fathers got together and they wrote these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In America, the last best hope, you write, quote, about the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence, there was no debate. It was what the founders believed. Jefferson's immortal words were conventional wisdom at the time. Let me ask you this. There are some people who like to go back and create a new vision of the founding fathers, and one of the things they'll say is, hey, wait a minute, these guys who wrote these words, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, they owned slaves. How do you explain that?
Well, I was thinking as you were reading those words that you were going to say, do people still believe that? Probably less of a consensus today, certainly among intellectuals. The American people believe it, but among a number of intellectuals, there may not be so much belief in this. Under evolving standards of understanding and so on, these things may be subject to more doubt. But I taught those words all across the country when I was Secretary of Education. I taught them to 7th graders when I visited schools, and my wife's advice to go around the country and visit schools before I made my pronouncements about education. And I'll tell you, the American people, for the most part, still very much believe them. Yeah, those guys owned slaves, and that was a regrettable thing. And for many of them, they knew it was a regrettable thing. Jefferson was haunted by it. Washington was bothered by it. A number of them, of course, as you know, freed their slaves. But they realized they had to do something about it. We can expect a lot of the founders, but I don't think you can expect people not to be of their time. This was a widespread practice, though, as I said, it strongly irritated the conscience of a number of them. And if it didn't, they wouldn't have put in provision for the abolition of slavery, which they did 11 years later, in '87, when they met in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. And the prohibition of the importation of slaves was, I think, a very clear recognition on their part that this was something that this new republic would have to eliminate. More significantly, if you read American history, you will see how these words themselves really, the rabbit was out of the hat at this point. Once you said those words, generation after generation of people who wanted freedom for all men would come back to those words. Frederick Douglass went back to those words. Martin Luther King went back to those words. So once they enunciated it, that grand moral principle, and that grand moral principle, as enunciated in the Declaration, is the founding doctrine of American political
right, and when you say all of the founding fathers, I think it was Adams that said this was the American mind, or that was Jefferson.
Yes, that's right.
You had Adams from Massachusetts,
right,
not for slavery. You had Thomas Jefferson. He actually owned slaves, but he did not want to see it perpetuated in the Union. The thing that brought them together, very different men from different parts of the country, was this principle.
That's exactly right, this principle. And these were men, obviously, who were suffering what they felt was a kind of servitude themselves. So they were particularly sensitive to the issue. It's a remarkable document. People say, well, how could the founding fathers have done this and that and the other thing? How could people whom we revere so much, have such shortcomings? And when you look at their individual lives, you'll see shortcomings as well. I just finished reading Hamilton's biography. A lot of shortcomings,
yes,
but quite a character. I think that's got it backwards. The real question is, how could fallible men, with all those imperfections, subject to original sin as all of us are, have achieved such incredible vision and have written this architecture of freedom.
Right, and this is another point you make in your book. You're quoting James Madison from the Federalist Papers when he's making the point, the case for the ratification of the Constitution, that, quote, if men were angels, no government would be necessary, and, quote, ambition must be made to counter ambition. Isn't that the framers, people who put together the basic structure of our government, understood that human nature was imperfect, that people were bound to do bad things even to others,
right,
and that they built an understanding of that in the actual structure of our government that's now lasted more than 200 years.
Liberty is to faction what air is to fire. If you give men freedom, or if you do not take their natural God-given freedom away, they're going to be partial. They're going to act in their own interest. They're going to form into groups. They're going to be rivalries. This they understood from the British philosophers whom they'd read. They understood this from Hobbes. They understood this from Locke. They understood this from their own astute observations of human nature. You know, you mentioned Madison. Madison never left the country. Do you know that? He never left. It was said by one of his biographers, the need for European experience wasn't in him, you know. He wasn't into junior year abroad. Right. Jefferson was really into junior year abroad, particularly in France. But when he went abroad, Jefferson, he was written by Madison, who said, send me the books, send me the books. Give me all the learning that I can get, so they could build this thing based on reflection.
These men were scholars, but both of these parts of the American founding idea, the idea of natural rights that come from a creator, and the idea of the fallen nature of man, these are ideas that came out of the religious experience and understanding of the people who founded our country.
Right. It was a professor at your alma mater at Princeton who wrote that civil liberties are the residuary legatee of ecclesiastical animosities. It's a mouthful, it's an academic thing, but if you think about it, what he was saying, this was Edward S. Corwin. Was he around when you were there? Yeah. But the point was, because of struggles in the church and church doctrine, church teaching, what this issued in the end, the real deposit, the real consequence, was this tradition of natural rights, human rights, and civil rights.
And an early way this came to fruition, you talk about in your book, was the Northwest Ordinance, which was passed by Congress under the Articles of Confederation in 1787. Did two very interesting things, as I understand it. It banned slavery.
Right.
In the area that became Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota.
The West.
And this was supported at the time
the Northwest,
by congressmen who were from the slave states.
That's right. That's exactly right. Now, again, there's this interesting tension throughout. This recognition, despite what people said and often what they did, that this thing was on its way out. You know, another interesting thing in the Confederacy, when the Confederate States got together, there was a provision that said no state can secede from the Confederacy. I mean, it's very interesting. People knew, despite what they were saying, that we were embarked on something here that was going to have to go at some point.